Action.
I'm John.
I'm Jessica.
We're here to talk to you about plyometrics. So a little bit of history about plyometrics. The word plyometrics has roots in the Greek word plyethine, which means to increase or augment. It was originally designed for power athletes, and so it was invented in Eastern Europe in the 1920s. So in the 1960s, Russian scientist Yuri Verkhoshansky, he's at track and field to boost explosiveness, speed, and agility of the legs and core muscles. And so they did really well in the Olympics, and it ended up, a U.S. coach saw how well it worked out, and he started to implement it for the Olympics in the 1970s. He's actually the one that coined the term plyometrics. So plyometrics comes from the Latin words pylo and metrics, which pylo means more and metrics means to measure. He chose those two root words because he wanted the athletes to be quicker and more powerful. So that's essentially the goal of plyometrics.
Former head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, Tom Landry, was the first professional coach to bring it into high-profile sports. So what he wanted to do was get stronger legs to propel the athlete's speed and hip muscles to be more developed and reinforced. So the hips and cores are critical for the success of the football players because you want their motions to be very explosive and their speed to be greater, and you want them to be able to take more kind of blows or tackles when they're competing. And the success they had with this, it kind of moved down into collegiate levels and even now into more of a rec ball level. That's become very popular use of exercise for athletes.
So a little bit about it. It's also known as jump training or plyos. Some people call it reactive training. And so exercises in which muscles use their maximum force in short intervals of time with the goal of increasing power, so speed and strength. So it's not only limited to lower extremity activities. There are a bunch of different upper body activities that you can do. Clap push-ups that they do in the Marine Corps and things like that. Just anything really explosive. So there are three different phases to it. There's eccentric, amortization, and concentric contractions. And it's essentially about how the body interacts with ground forces. There's a lot of other upper body activities that you can do, and we'll get into some of those when we talk about the contractions.
And if you look at the picture, it's an example of how a plyometric exercise would be done. It's coming from a position going up onto any kind of block or stairs, just getting that jumping motion and kind of a forceful landing. So eccentric contractions, it's also used or referred to as deceleration, loading, yielding, or the cocking phase. It's kind of the pre-phase where, for example, the basketball player in this picture, how her knees and her arms are bent, she's getting that power in order to make a free throw. The muscle is essentially pre-stretched, and the energy is kind of, the potential energy is stored, so that way through later contractions it can be carried out. And this is done so they can achieve maximum power. Another example would be when a baseball player right here kind of cocks back their arm in order to throw the ball to first base.
All right. So the amortization phase is essentially the midpoint. So you have the eccentric contraction, and you have the concentric contraction. The amortization phase is a really, really short phase where the muscle transitions that loaded energy, that loaded potential energy, so that you can explode through the concentric phase and really give as much force as possible. So the shorter the amortization phase, the better. The quicker that you can transition that energy is really what gives plyometrics its power. So if you're not able to shorten that phase, then you're not really doing a plyometric movement. You're not shocking your muscle and giving it really maximal power. So. And concentric contractions, that's where the muscle releases all that energy that it's stored. So it's a shortening contraction. It shortens the muscle. And so, like, for example, if you're jumping for the basket on a rebound or shooting or something like that, or you're slinging a ball to first base, is where you're unloading all that potential energy.
Okay, so this image right here kind of gives a good example of how the three phases work together. So the image on the top shows with the muscle and nervous system power. The one on the bottom gives a little bit more of a visual. So we start with the rubber band, and in this phase you're starting the stretch of the rubber band in order to kind of give it its initial stretch and to give it its potential energy. That would be the eccentric phase. The middle stage is that just a little bit of a further stretch in order to give it its full potential. And this last phase, which would be the concentric phase, is when it's released and all that maximum power that was kind of built up is released and the activity is able to be done. So a lot of things can come from plyometrics kind of internally. One of them is muscular power. So plyometrics strengthens the muscle fibers and converts them into the strength into speed. So this would be an example of the fast twitch fibers. So that's more for speed and quickness and kind of explosive movements, not so much the slow endurance type things. So the muscle will eventually, as plyometric goes on and you've trained yourself with it, they'll contract quicker and the fibers will be recruited a lot quicker, so more activities can be done, there's more power with it. This causes more strength in the arms and the legs, and it enhances kind of a higher rate of force development, and the brain kind of communicates with the nervous system as well with this to get those muscles to work a little bit faster.
And so by doing this, you can actually increase the speed of your neuromuscular junctions and just the nervous system itself. You're also training that at the same time while you're doing these plyometric movements.
So this image right here kind of gives us an example of the fast twitch fibers and what they're good for. So they're good for strength activities, which would be eventually the plyometric, more force added, very rapid movements. Sprinters are the main type of athletes, any kind of sprinter, or just any activity that makes you move quick and nothing that is a long period of time. Everything is done a lot quicker, so the energy is released in small amounts but very, very quickly. You don't need as much mitochondria because it's not a great amount of power needed over time, and there's less myoglobin needed. So endurance for plyometrics is something else that kind of comes along with training. It can help increase the stamina in very specific types of events. So if it's practice before an event, it can be very beneficial. It can be used to enhance the power, and the power is important to kind of see where your intensity is going to be at. So again, if it's done beforehand, it can kind of help you get to that greater intensity during your activity. It helps with the saving cost of doing any kind of activity as well. So if you're trained in plyometrics and you've done it for a long time and you've built up that stamina, you can essentially go a lot longer and save up your energy to continue on activities longer than you would have been able to prior.
Stronger muscles go longer.
Yes, they do.
All right. So burning calories. So one of the big things is when you build up those type 2 fibers, those muscles are obviously going to grow, they're going to recruit and things like that. So muscle actually needs a lot of energy to perform. So you're going to end up, even at rest, you're going to end up burning more calories. When you're performing, you're burning more calories because that muscle needs that energy to get through the exercises or whatever activity you're doing. So plyometric exercises do increase metabolism just through burning those calories when you're resting. So.
We're now going to get into kind of the requirements for training for plyometrics, and this chart right here shows a good kind of guidelines you should follow when training for plyometrics. So it should be safe, you should have the right shoes on, you should be performing on floors that you would typically perform on for your activity, so you're used to it and that you're training properly. It should be progressive, so you should go from easy to hard or simple to complex, and then for beginners, you start with your body weight and go to kind of more weight-bearing activities, so using any kind of barbell or dumbbells, that sort of thing. It also shows different kind of ways that plyometric activities can be done. So they can be done going side to side, up and down. They can be done kind of full if you're more advanced, or they can be done in partial. You can use cones, you can use stairs, you can use the stair steppers, the little like plastic things. And you're doing different muscle actions, so you're working the eccentric, isometric, and concentric muscles movements.
And so just to add a few things, so the training surfaces, they've done some research, and some people have been doing plyometric exercises in sand. That's shown to, I guess, add a little bit to stability muscles and things like that, and just add, a variable to the training. So obviously performing with proper supervision is huge, but the big thing is that progression. So you don't want to start off with something really hard and, revert to something easier. You want to work your way up so that you don't have as much of a chance of injuring yourself.
So some of the requirements, especially for beginners, it's super important that you know how to train them, or they know how to do them properly. So in order to start plyometrics as a beginner, they must be able to balance efficiently, have adequate core strength and joint stability and range of motion. They should again start with very light exercises and go to more advanced exercises. Plyometric exercises for stabilization, strength, and then power, they should kind of go in that order. So stabilization would be something like a squat jump, strength would be something like a tuck jump, and power would be more of quick tempo type stuff. So just using body weight, not body weight, using loaded activities. Practicing how you land is super, super important as well. So the toe to heel landing should be practiced a lot, because if it's not, when doing some kind of jump, you have the possibility to strain your ankle, break an ankle even, hurt knees, that kind of thing. So that's something that really wants to be watched when beginners start training. So this image kind of shows a good example of how plyometrics should go. So it's like a stair step. You start in the low level and you work your way up. So you're going to start in the stabilization phase. That'll be phase 1. Phase 2 through 4 would be the strengthening phase. And then 5 and 6 would be power. And then obviously you can go on from there. It would just be increasing in the power, strength, and then adding in stabilization, making sure everything is kind of worked out the whole way through a program. And this image also gives a really good breakdown of activities that could be done, almost like a prescription for how someone should do plyometrics. So it shows that the reps for stabilization should be high, but your sets should be very low. With strength, they'll increase, and then with power, they'll increase from there. Rest is a lot longer in stabilization because you're just getting started. That's the first phase. You need a little bit longer of a rest. And as you can see, strength and power, the rest is about the same, so it's shorter. You don't need it as much. So it shows a good example of how it should go.
And so one of the big things is, obviously you don't want to rush into it, but these exercises are so taxing on your system. So you really want to be careful, and that's why they only do 1 to 3 sets, 5 to 8 reps, things like that. It takes a lot out of your body if you're doing them properly, so you want to be careful. All right, so some of the positive effects. It's been shown that you can increase your vertical height, long jump, your running speed, and so with working out these muscles, you can also help yourself and prevent injury. There's an obvious increase in muscular power, so if you're increasing your strength and you're doing something as explosive as this, your power is just the strength over time. So anything that you're putting into it, you're able to do things quicker. So that's how you increase that power. Obviously, we talked about it earlier. Body burns more calories, and so just from that maintenance, you can lose more weight. So there's strength and elasticity in your tendons that increases with all of this. Putting them under the pressure, it really helps strengthen those. It lowers the chances of tearing those just because you're getting stronger. So some of the negative effects, it's hard to see how it's beneficial for anybody who's not a competitor. somebody who's not a trained athlete. I mean, you can make yourself better, but you can really see the performance aspects, on the field, or somebody who's has somebody there competing against them. Actually read something that time of day is important, and this is just an approximation because they say that our body temperature is higher between 3 to 6 because for somebody who's on a normal schedule, that's the approximate time that everybody's peak body temperature occurs. One of the big things for this is, without proper training and things like that, there's a high risk of injury. You can strain something, tear something, break something. There's a lot of power being used, and if your muscles aren't ready for it, joints aren't ready, then there's just such a big risk, and that's why it's so important to work with a trainer, somebody who's trained with this, or if you're a competitive athlete, then hopefully you know a little bit more, but you still have to be careful.
And going back to the landing stuff, and the injuries can come if you don't know how to land correctly when doing anything plyometric. So if you're not doing a heel to toe type landing, you can cause these injuries, and that's just something that really wants to be avoided or needs to be avoided. So there are some things that need to be avoided other than the landing stuff when doing plyometric. It's definitely not recommended for anybody who has a chronic illness or a limiting condition. It's a lot of power in your body. It takes a lot out of your body. So if you can't handle that, it's just something that you should probably save until a doctor has said, okay, that's fine, you can do it, or just avoid it altogether. Moving the knees from one side to the other, so any kind of back and forth type movement with plyometrics, you want to be super careful with that your knees are stable, because if not, you can cause those tears or strains, and I don't think anyone wants to go through that. Performing strength sessions before plyometrics is super important to avoid. Any kind of weightlifting or strength, anything, it really takes a lot out of your body, and since plyometrics is so demanding on your body, doing any kind of strength before, when you go into plyometrics, you're already fatigued, and your risk of injury is just so much greater if you do any kind of strength before a plyometric session. All these risks can be reduced by wearing the proper shoes, practicing on the proper floor, not performing any kind of tasking exercise beforehand. Again, no illnesses. What you don't want to cause with this stuff is any kind of muscle strain, or you don't want to get hurt when you're doing any kind of plyometrics activities. So we have some videos that we're going to show you. This first one is just a type of plyometrics that can be done. It's not as much of the kind of force-bearing stuff that we were talking about, but it's an example of how to kind of stretch plyometrics and make it something a little bit different.
One of the things to keep in mind here is that over the years, plyometrics has kind of broadened. So you had strictly, explosive movements back in the day, but now there are so many things that they're doing like this here, where they're not extremely explosive movements, but you still have a short phase there.
So right here, he kind of advanced his exercise a little bit more, so going from that simple to more complex. So this exercise right here is a lot more of the force-bearing stuff. The frog jumps are as well. It's a lot of using your body weight and just using force and being very explosive with your movements. And he does this exercise extremely quick, which not a lot of people can do unless you're super trained in plyometrics. So it's clear that he's done it a lot. So this video is a little bit longer, but we're going to go ahead and skip to the next one. This video shows more about, I'm going to skip through it a little bit because I don't really want to hear what he's saying. So this video definitely shows more of the box plyometrics. So more of typically what people would think plyometrics would be. So here you can see he is jumping, switching feet on the box, and he's really utilizing that explosiveness and that force-bearing type of exercise. And as you can tell too, he's a little more advanced because the single leg hops, that's definitely for someone who's been doing it for a long time. This side-to-side movement right here is definitely one thing that we were talking about with avoiding, especially if you're not able to stabilize your knees very well. It should be avoided. The push-up thing, that's not much of plyometrics. I think that's just a little bit of extra he's adding in there.
Yeah, like you do have some push-up things, like those clap push-ups where you end up getting a lot of force, and you do have things that, have that amortization phase where it's a real short phase. You have that eccentric contraction where you're going down and you end up preloading all that potential energy. And so then you have that short amortization phase and then the concentric contraction along with it.
He adds a few more in here, and I just want to go to the one he ends with. This one right here is actually the one I kind of wanted to go to. It shows the different depths and going from that, this one here too, the explosiveness, going from that eccentric to that concentric. His amortization phase was very, very short, and you can see that from his landing all the way to his jump. So that's it for that video. We won't show you the whole thing. It's a little bit too long for our liking. I think there's one little thing I think we want to go back to.
So yeah, all these training surfaces, that's one of the big things, is that training surface is huge. If you're a beginner, you just want to stick to something, easy, some firm surface that isn't going to give, like sand, like we talked about earlier. Sand's a big one. A lot of these people do those that are really advanced. Also, there's some people do it in water. That's good for people who have injuries, but also it has been shown over control groups and even groups that have been involved in plyometrics. It's shown to give you greater strength gains, more power output than those control groups.
Yeah, there have been a lot of studies and a lot of articles that we read that really showed that when you're an athlete and you're doing these, you see this come out so much in your performances. So, going from that simple to complex, it really follows into your activity. So when you're a football player and you have to cut real quick, that plyometric plays into that. When you have to explode up from your stance and you have to tackle real quick, that kind of stuff. And like a lot of these papers or articles have said, it's very hard to see any kind of improvement in a non-athlete other than advancing in it, because you're not using it in everyday life like these athletes are.
Yeah, they're all very sport specific, and that's the way all the research is. So you have all these researchers that do strictly basketball, because there are different groups to these plyometric training sessions. You have different movements such as the rotational, you have the run and cut, so quick movements, you have jump, which is one of the biggest ones. Obviously that's used in a lot of different sports, but there's also strength and things like that. So they're all extremely sport specific, and that's how the training should be. So
that's about it. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. We'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Love you, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you.